And we have a very long and quite boring account of what's going to happen. It's quite specific to the extent that if it was written beforehand, it would be really interesting to try and marry that up with history. But my feeling is you have to default to the assumption this was written afterwards on the basis that it could have been. Therefore, it's not very interesting because it could have just been written afterwards, and who cares if it matches up. This week I have read chapters 9 to 12 of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, which takes us up to the end of that book. So this is a summary of what I've discovered in these, 45 minutes of reading where it was there. Because it's the end of the book, we'll also do a summary of the book overall, albeit it's an interesting one to summarise in terms of a bit mad. This one, interestingly, opens with a reference to the scriptures, which I thought, well, given the book of Daniel obviously wasn't in it at that point, and if we talk about the scriptures now, what do we mean is what we're reading. It's interesting, what was their version of the Bible at this point? I suppose there's the Torah, or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. So I guess they might have had that, I suppose. And I think no matter how you look at it historically, no one would argue that didn't already exist by this point. But yeah, so it's kind of an interesting and sort of talk about the scriptures within the scriptures. Quite fun. We have talk of the desolation of Jerusalem. Desolation is such a great word, isn't it? It's a very biblical sort of word. And it's talk that it's going to last 70 years. I guess this problem for this one is when the book of Daniel was written, because obviously it's set something like 600 BC, but it sounds like it was written more like 200 BC. So by 200 BC, everything had all basically already happened. I mean, the Babylonians had been and gone, the Persians had come, Alexander the Great had already been, I think. Yes, so Alexander the Great had already come in, conquered it, and died. So it's that problem of you can't really chalk this down as prophecy because there is a chance it was written after all this stuff happened. But I suppose it would be interesting. It's still remarkable how it fits. We then have Daniel doing a big prayer, which is always interesting when you get the big key characters, how they pray and that sort of thing. But in this instance, it's a sort of a slightly disappointing prayer because what he says is he's asked for the punishment on the Israelites to be lifted. And he says, not because we are righteous, but because of your great mercy. The trouble is, I mean, that's basically been the story of the Old Testament, isn't it? It's God giving them a punishment, then trying to give them another chance, and they blow it again. There comes a point where you've got to say, yes, this is the medicine, you've got to take it. And it seems odd of Daniel to suggest that they shouldn't have it and that God should just let them off. But to what end? That's clearly not going to work very well. It does seem anyway. God doesn't specifically say no in this, but the answer does seem to be a no. Chapter 9, verse 25 to 27 is going to get weird, but I shall read that, so we're going to need the keeper of the book to sort that out. And it says, know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens. There's a footnote that suggests that 7 referring to here is a week, so 7 weeks. And 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, 62 weeks, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. I mean, what? Most of the Bible is like this. It's really hard to read and to figure out. Okay, so there's talk about an anointed one, or the anointed one, but there's a footnote that talks about it being an anointed one, as in not anyone particularly special. If you Google this, as I'm doing progressively more of, my plan at outset had been to see what I think, not what everybody else thinks. But some of this stuff is so confusing. You just want to see what do other people look at this as, and then put some context around it. The Christians, it seems obviously, say that this is talking about Jesus as the anointed one, so it's the Messiah thing. The Jews, though, and Muslims, I think, to some extent, seem to see this more as talk about just Cyrus, who's coming as the king of Persia in due course. But at the point this was written, may already have existed, or existed and been and gone. So, yeah, I don't quite know how you're supposed to... I mean, it fits well for Christianity, but you can suddenly see... Oh, no, it's just talking about Cyrus. It's not actually talking about some special super person coming. It's just talking about some king who's going to die, and then... Yeah, I don't know. I find myself getting more confused rather than less with some of this, which is a bit of a problem. Daniel then has a vision of a man, and interestingly, Daniel has this vision whilst he's with lots of other people, but they don't see it. So you've got the obvious question there: are visions internal, like hallucinations and dreams, sort of thing? I may sort of assume when people are having visions. I don't know. Moses burning bush. It doesn't say that's a vision, to be fair, but presumably that was an actual physical thing happening in the world. I say I've been to the burning bush, haven't I? So a bit sceptical. But yeah, this seems to be a big old vision whilst he's with other people. So it seems more like a daydream sort of vision, which for me anyway gives it a bit less credence in terms of validity. It does say, to be fair, that the vision still has impact on the others because they're all terrified and they go off to hide, even though they can't see it. So presumably they don't know why they're hiding. But yeah, there we go. The chap in the vision anyway, so this is going to get weird, talks about he'd been resisted by the king of Persia, Cyrus of Persia at this point, for 21 days. Okay, so 3 sevens in that context, but it doesn't seem to fit. And then he talks about someone called Michael, who was a chief prince of Persia, came to help the vision man with his struggle with Cyrus the king, because he was then held up there. But he was held up with King Cyrus, not by King Cyrus. It's very confusing. So it's almost like, it seems, and if you Google it, it seems to be talking about some sort of suggestion of some sort of spiritual battle between Cyrus and this, what sounds like an angel. And this Michael chap had to come and help. Yeah. And then the vision person goes on to talk about a prince of Greece coming as well. And he's going to have to move on and go and do battle with that one as well. The timing and everything of all this would suggest that he's talking about Alexander the Great. But it's certainly not stated that it's Alexander the Great. And actually some of the stuff on Google seems to suggest this is talking about spiritual stuff, not actual leaders of Persia and Greece. Yeah, I mean, whether that's some sort of metaphorical thing or not, I don't know. But this angel guy in the dream, whatever it is, gives Daniel some sort of power up anyway, and then sends him off and tells him, you're going to have to go and fight all this as well. And then we have a very long and quite boring account of what's going to happen. It's quite specific, to the extent that if it was written beforehand, it would be really interesting to try and marry that up with history. But my feeling is you have to default to the assumption this was written afterwards on the basis that it could have been. Therefore, it's not very interesting because it could have just been written afterwards, and who cares if it matches up? I suppose if it doesn't match up, it would sort of suggest it was written before, but then it's not interesting anyway because it's not right. So yeah. Chapter 12 then talks about the end times and how some people will be brought back to eternal life. Great, yeah, that seems to agree with what we had in Isaiah. But it talks about others to shame and everlasting contempt. The word everlasting in there seems problematic. I know there's this debate on hell, whether it's you're just annihilated or you're perpetual torture sort of thing. The perpetual torture angle seems to be ridiculous because, I mean, even Hitler, I don't know how old he was when he died, 50s, 60s, something like that. Even if he was awful for every minute of his 60 years, does he still deserve eons of torture for that? Maybe. That's not my place to say. But it's not obvious that that's the case anyway. So the perpetual torment idea, to me, seems really daft. But this does say everlasting contempt. I don't know whose contempt, could be their own contempt, but I have trouble with the idea that if you're good and you go to a positive place after death, then that could be eternal. That would make some sense. But a negative place eternally doesn't seem quite right, or doesn't feel right anyway, at least, for what impact that has. Daniel then handily asks the question, when will all this stuff happen? But unfortunately, even within the passage, it says that he doesn't really understand the answer. And there seem to be hints towards it being 2.5 years or 3.5 years, weirdly specific. but non-conclusive. And of course, that would have put it all a very, very long time ago. And yeah, again, we've got that problem of the end times, which I suppose is one of the problems of the book of Daniel generally, isn't it? It's that it keeps talking about stuff that makes it sound as if all this stuff should have already happened and we should be past the end times. Which, well, maybe that makes this hell, actually, doesn't it? Perhaps. No, that's an interesting idea. I've done a couple of videos where I've talked about, if this is heaven, I want my money back. But maybe this isn't heaven. Maybe this is, I don't know. It's a little bit ridiculous, isn't it? What you do with that, I don't know. And hopefully in the context of the New Testament, which we will be onto soon, will help this to make a bit more sense. But yeah, interesting in the sense that he comes up with some key stuff which is clearly going to come back later, about coming on the clouds, coming with the clouds of heaven and all the rest of it. But yeah, on to the next one.